Welcome to another episode of Inclusion Talks, and it's a great pleasure to have my co-host with me, Cindy McDougall. Cindy, great to have you with us. Welcome.
Great to be back, Dan.
Now, Cindy, just before we introduce our guests, we better give a shout out to our sponsor, Aussie Home Loans. And Aussie Home Loans are a magnificent company who are happy to do any sort of deal with anyone when it comes to home loans, equipment loans, sporting loans, car loans, first home buyers as well. Make sure you get in touch with them. You can go and see them face to face around Australia. You can speak to them on the phone, or you can do what we're doing today. You can chat to them on Zoom. Tell us about our guest today, Cindy. It's a great pleasure to have her, of course.
Thanks, Dan. Today on Inclusion Talks, we welcome Grassroots Administrator, Para All Abilities Inclusion in Sport Advocate, Albury Little Athletic Centre Secretary, and all-round amazing person, Elisabeth Ryan. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great. So today we've decided to veer away from an athlete focus in the podcast and go into the lesser thought of aspects of all abilities inclusion. We're going to chat about the admin side of inclusion in sport. Elisabeth is a longtime friend of mine, and we've walked the path of trying to build inclusion, especially in regional and rural areas where it isn't as easy to gain pathways in sport for almost 7 years. So, you've been involved in athletics for many years as an athlete, parent, executive, general committee member, and you're also an official and a coach. What started your passion for disability inclusion?
So a lot of things influenced, but I guess the one thing that stuck out for us was my older son, Jack, qualified way back when he was in primary school through to state with his school. Athletics in the sport of athletics, and it wasn't a sport that sort of as, I suppose, valued or promoted as others in his school. So we reached out in the parent forum to connect with other families that were going, because we're very big on supporting others and watching their events and cheering them on. So we wanted to know who else was sort of competing, and we connected with another family and went down to Melbourne, and we met the English family, whose daughter Tori is a para-athlete who also went to Jack's school. Whilst we were watching our kids compete, as parents do, we chatted away, and they told me a story of how the school had made Tori run with the F2 students over mini hurdles, thinking that that was being inclusive. That aside, they also then weren't aware of all the, I suppose, opportunities that were available for para-athletes through SSV, which I was aware of at the time and, shared with them. And I guess through those conversations and just that brief experience with the English family, it made me realise how far that we really had to go in inclusion. And then also, I suppose, got me thinking about my roles at the time, being involved in Little Aths, what changes that I could do as an individual to help improve things within the organisations I was involved in. Because the first thing I said to the Englishers obviously was, well, how about you come join Little Aths? We have a centre. And then they raised some questions. They said, well, how does Tori participate? What does that look like? And I sort of went, okay, that's a conversation I really need to go back to my committee, and we need to talk about these things. How can we make it more accessible for athletes like Tori? So, I guess you could say Tori English inspired me, and we're great friends to this day. And it's been a pleasure to follow her journey, because she did come and join us at Little Aths and continued on through the sport.
Must admit, I'm hoping to have Tori on the podcast at some stage. She's a busy little person, and I'm not saying that to be derogatory, because Tori is short-statured. So for our listeners, Tori's disability classification is a short stature, and that has a lot of terms like little people and dwarfism. But we find that the most respectful name for them, and that is what is carried through in most of our sporting environments, is short-statured. So Tori has blazed a bit of a trail at Albury, and she's also a family friend of mine, and absolutely adore Tori, as do my children. And as I said, I'm hoping to have her on at a later stage, but she's definitely someone who isn't just E's inspiration, but a lot of other people's inspirations. So on that, you're also an official. I'd love to start first on the officiating side of sport. Did you find it hard approaching officiating when you were dealing with children with a disability? And what did you find the easiest or the hardest about officiating within the rules for those children, especially in the early days of Little Athletics Victoria adding in multi-class as a standalone section with their own events?
I did find officiating hard. I'll be honest, because you know, I didn't know what rules applied, how they were different, where to even go and find the rules for the individual classifications that we were coming across and the different para athletes that were coming to our centre. I thought back then not much information was provided except for some broad definitions of different classifications you might come across. And I think sort of too, there wasn't enough support or education given to those in officiating as to how to find or access that information, who you could contact for support. And I guess for me, I was just really conscious of not offending somebody, not upsetting an athlete because I wasn't officiating in the correct way or using the wrong terminology. And, you know, I wanted to be really respectful of them and their families. And I know that, you know, I suppose we went on a bit of a journey using Little Athletics as a example in the early days. I suppose they were learning too. And we went on that journey with them in what needed to improve and what areas we needed more support in. So, yeah, it was pretty hard at the start. But, you know, I guess as we went on that journey, we learnt more and tapped into valuable resources to sort of know how to officiate, you know, correctly.
And I think that's a big thing, is that, you know, the rules are really important, but you also have to find ways to adapt it, because even within the classifications, sometimes the athletes involved, I guess, don't have the capabilities that the rules or the guidelines expect of them. Like a great one for me when I first started officiating was that some kids were expected to jump from a 1 meter or a 2 meter line in the long jump, even though they had disabilities that made that pretty much impossible. And it was very much around the time that there were no specific rules around being able to move a marker forward to the edge of the pit so that a child could jump from the edge of the pit. And for an official, it's not a hard adaptation to make, but it's just that it wasn't actually included in the ruling. So you're like, oh, should I be doing this? Am I doing something illegal? But at the same time, you're wanting to give the children the best possible experience they can get and giving them confidence, which I think is the key to most sports. As an official, was it hard to find ways to add in those adaptations and make it a fair playing field?
For me, no. Basically, what you've said is how sort of we approached it. It was a bit of I think it was a no-brainer sometimes. I mean, we just, at our centre, for example, our para-athletes, we all run in the one age group. There's, I know other centres run it differently because they have a lot more para-athletes than we do, and that's perfectly fine. But at Albury, we run them all together, and, you know, that's what the kids want. They want to be with their friends. So it's, you know, like you said, we have the mats that the kids can jump off, or you move the marker, or you adjust the weight that they're throwing with. At the end of the day, we want them to participate and build that confidence and have fun and come back next week. And, you know, like, I suppose we're lucky in the space that we have a synthetic track, which makes it fairly accessible for some athletes over other centres. But, yeah, no, I don't think it was hard to adapt. And, I mean, also having that conversation with parents too about how can we adapt this to help your child or to enable your child to participate, because it might be something that they can tell us too that we can do. You know, it might be a really simple one is I had a child that we, instead of being near the starting gun, we moved him right to the end into lane 10 so he could participate with his headphones, and, you know, that solved that barrier to participation for him. So it could be the slightest adaptation you have to make, but yeah, I think it's a no-brainer really, some of them.
Do you think that the understanding of officiating needs, specifically from the state sporting organisations and your national sporting organisations have grown or improved in the time? Like, do you think it's got to a point where they are willing to listen and in most cases can go, okay, this is definitely something we need? Do you think it's improving?
Obviously from an outsider's perspective, I do. I can't obviously speak for para athletes and their experiences out in the competition field. They might disagree with me, but I've come across some really fantastic officials in our short time, really, in athletics that are going the extra mile to, educate themselves and, have those conversations around what needs to happen for the athletes to compete. So, I do think it has, but like I said, I can't speak fully for the para community, though, because they're the ones out there competing.
Definitely. Now, you touched on something that I found really interesting. You said about how you had to go back to your committee and speak to them about how you could be inclusive. As an administrator, was it hard to gain acceptance of the need to include multi-class para athletes into the weekly competition? And how did you get the volunteers and parents to be accepting of the adaptations and patients? Because there is a lot of patience involved in some of the classifications and how you have to modify. Did you see it? Was it accepted? And, you obviously got it to thrive because you've got a strong para community at your centre. But did you ever find it hard to get people to help out?
So as a centre, Albury, we've always had para athletes compete at the centre. That was something that always occurred. However, it wasn't, for me, there wasn't any official records. There wasn't any education around officiating, what it looked like, providing those opportunities to go to region and state, helping families find out about how they could get classified to go to those competitions. So there was a lot of work to be done in that space. And I will say that at Albury, everyone was on board from the minute we brought it up. They wanted to learn, they wanted to be involved. We wanted to expand on what we offered and make sure that we were offering the product correctly, so everybody could access what we were promoting at Albury. And I think too, it was a really interesting time, because whilst we were sort of trying to find out the best way to go about having para athletes in our competition, and whether we did a standalone group for them, like I think Whittlesea does it like that, or whether we include them, a lot of parents were sort of coming to us saying, oh, we're actually really interested in what you're talking about, because whilst our child's been at your centre, we're currently in the process of getting a diagnosis done, and we want to know more about this multi-class, but we're sort of a bit hesitant for people to know, or we don't want to be judged by other parents, and we just sort of want to know what that is going to look like at your centre. So it was a lot of conversations, and we went and talked to a lot of people about their experiences in other sports and what was lacking, what would we need? Do we need to have a quiet space for athletes to go and access when it becomes overwhelming? Do we do things like, I know that some athletes can't handle the waiting of their turn for long jump, because it is, some groups have 30, 40 kids in it. Mm. It's a lot of waiting around and things like that. So do we adapt the program so they get to do their 3 jumps first, or do we they go and do 1 jump and they go and do shot put in the meantime, or there might be a breakout space for them to go and use sensory toys, whatever it might be. We really had to work hard. And I think, trying to remember, because it feels like a lifetime ago now, but I think LA Vic too were starting to do a few at their conference. They offered some multi-class education sessions that we could go to. You may have even spoken at one, Cindy.
May have ran one, and I reckon that's how we met.
I'm pretty sure it was, actually. So I thought, right, well, I've got to tap into that resource, and I've got to go and do some exploring in this space to sort of make sure we get it right. And, I think it's ever evolving. It's, no one year is the same to another. We had an athlete who had cerebral palsy, and we hadn't had an athlete who had that disability before. So that was a lot of conversations with his family about what he could do and how, he loved long jump and how he could do his throwing. And, so it's ever evolving, I think. And as far as sort of the officiating and our parents and the groups went, we're lucky at Albury. We've got great parents and great acceptance in the community. And there's a lot of other sporting groups that have a lot of para athletes coming. And I suppose the other thing too is at Albury, we actually work alongside the Special Olympics in Albury. So the athletes there that are working towards their qualifiers and training come and join in on a weekly basis with our athletes and run with them and do the walks. And it was just just getting educated and continuing to educate as we get new families come through about how we officiate and how we adapt. And we've I think we've done well, but like I said, always evolving, and we can always do better and learning as we go.
I think that's a big thing.
I was just going to say,
sorry, Dan.
Cindy, this is, of course, our podcast, Inclusion Talks, for Aussie Home Loans. They've got over 25 lenders around Australia. I was just going to throw a very quick question in here, but Cindy, you're doing a great job running this. The question I've got for you, Elisabeth, because you're Elisabeth Ryan is our guest today, leading administrator when it comes to para sports and also all ability sport. Because you're such a big centre, because you're a centre that seems to be able to cater for everyone's needs and everyone's abilities, do you have people travelling a long way away and families a long way away to cater for their kids' needs? And how far would be the furthest, if you can think?
So we're on the border, Albury-Wodonga. Yeah. So as far as people travelling to us, we've had kids from as far as Mount Beauty. I don't know how many kilometres that is. It's not too, probably about over an hour and a half.
Right.
We have families come in from Holbrook that's over an hour away.
Good.
But obviously the majority of our athletes come from within Albury-Wodonga.
It's terrific though, Cindy, isn't it, when you think about that, because obviously they want an opportunity, and this is a big centre, well run. It just indicates what a great job Elisabeth and her staff and volunteers are doing.
Look, it definitely is, and I think that's the key to all of it. And that is that you keep your open mind. And I think he had a brilliant committee, an open-minded committee. They were willing to try new things. They were willing to learn, which I think is the key to all of it. It can be so overwhelming, especially if you're a small centre, because volunteers are always time poor. And, most of the volunteers involved in the majority of sports are juggling more than one sport, multiple children, careers, home life. And I think the fear of what it would entail is a big thing. So I think that's probably a really big key to seeing inclusion grow, is one, getting the understanding out there that it doesn't have to be monumental changes, that it's talking to the families, it's talking to the support networks, it's being willing to look into things. And, while the rules are incredibly important, as we've stressed, sometimes it's tweaking them. And I think that's part of my love of Little Ass, and I'm sure it is as well, is that the kids are there to better themselves. They're not going up against other children. It's not a team sport unless they're doing relays. In general, it's about them bettering themselves. So those adaptations that you can make for children with a disability, they don't impact anyone else. So as all they're doing is bettering the child that is coming and learning and gaining confidence and building social skills and building ability. So I think that's the biggest message for officials and administrators, is that, just don't be afraid, ask the questions, keep an open mind, and anything can grow. Interestingly, on that front, Elisabeth, you've seen it grow from basic inclusion at centre level to widening presence at region, growing at state. How did you go with gaining access to equipment? I know that, our listeners have a bit of an idea from some of the athletes we've spoken to, but not a lot. And I'm hoping to have some of the athletes on that use more of the adaptive technology and the adaptive equipment. How do you go about children with special needs that need to engage with different equipment? Can you explain what your centre might do that sets it apart? You said you've got them travelling from a long way. What do you have, or what can you offer that helps support that para engagement?
So I suppose at our centre, obviously I mentioned the synthetic track. So in the instance of athletes in wheelchairs, they're able to participate in the track events that we can offer. We have access to the tie downs for throwing chairs. However, I suppose this is our barrier being regional. We don't have as easy access to that sort of equipment as, say, a metro centre. I know LA Vic do have on offer some limited equipment for multi-class children, which we can, I believe, hire. But for those listening, we are a good 4-hour trip from Melbourne and then 4 hours back, which is not to say we wouldn't do it. We would drive to Melbourne to get that if that's something we need, could do for our athletes. But also, I suppose, like I know Richard Coleman has access to some wheelies that he can provide centres as well. But again, being regional, we don't have as much access to those things. So, that's been a bit of a struggle. But, the small things that we've done is, for the instance of Tori, she obviously threw a different weight to everybody else. So we, as a centre, went out and purchased the correct weight shot puts and discuses that she needed to make sure that she had what she needed to be able to participate in that instance.
I think it's really interesting, Dan, just for your knowledge and for our listeners' knowledge, a race chair, a frame runner, they're in the tens of thousands of dollars. So for little centres, they're not easily accessible. And as Elisabeth said, LA Vic have been fantastic in procuring a couple of throwing chairs and some equipment that can be brought out to the centres should they need. And I'll be completely transparent, I'm sure they won't mind. I've been dealing with Stall at the minute. I actually purchased a throwing chair myself. I had one made and purchased it myself, and that's been at Geelong, and they've been used. Yep. I bought a.
What that cost you? 10,000?
No, so the throwing chairs aren't like the race chairs. They're just an adapted seat that can be tied down for seated throwers. So they're about $400, $450. But they are literally the difference between a child that is in a chair or has very limited mobility actually being able to I guess confidently throw a discus or a shot put. So I'm actually I've lent it to Geelong for the last couple of seasons because they had an athlete that needed it, and it's actually heading to Stall next year for them to use. But again, a lot of centres have tie down points, and these are the things that, they could, I guess, be seen as a barrier, but we've seen that adapted by, a support person holding the back of a child's wheelchair and the child throwing the shot put from the wheelchair. And while it's not, I guess, the safest way, a throwing chair is great because it's horrible to say it, but they're strapped into the chair, so they are safe and they can do it to their best of ability. Whereas if they're in their own chair, you're relying on a support person to be able to give them the best opportunity. But, it is and can be quite expensive. And I think we're probably lucky that there are a lot of adaptive grants coming up, and Sports and Rec Victoria have been great for all different sports, that they're expanding their grants. And, you can get places like ASF and there are, I guess, ways of being able to access grants. But again, it's that knowledge. And I think it's the key to it, and leads, I guess, into my next one, which is, if you were giving advice to a small centre who didn't have access to adaptive or supportive equipment, what would you suggest the best way that the children, engage? Is it that you get them throwing in their chair? Is it that, you get someone to support running them down the straight? What, Elisabeth, do you think would be something easy, maybe an idea for a smaller centre to help them with inclusion?
Well, you made some really great points already. So literally running down a straight with them. I know for one athlete that we had in a wheelchair, they weren't able to throw because we didn't have the right equipment for them to throw out of the discus cage or the shot put ring. So a suggestion, and I cannot remember for the life of me who gave it to, might even been you, Cindy, but the suggestion we were given that what we could do is they put the wheelchair at the end of the long jump runway and they throw into the sandpit, because then it's on the synthetic run up, so it's not going to tip over or anything. And we measure the throw into the long jump pit. And that wasn't something I'd ever thought about until someone in the para space said, well, why can't you do it like that? It's still, there's still a throw, they're still participating, and you've adapted for that child to still be part of the event. So that was a really good suggestion. Just I guess for any small centre starting out, you don't have to go in all guns blazing and buy the $10,000 chairs and all those sorts of things. There are so many little ways that you can make it happen at your centre that don't require a lot of money, or it just, like you said, education and conversations, and those small adaptations can be made for them to participate.
This is our Inclusion Talks podcast with Dan Lonigan and Cindy McDougall. We're here for Aussie Home Loans. Elisabeth Ryan is our guest, inspirational administrator at the Albury Little Ath Centre, looking after all ability sport and also para sports. Elisabeth, do you see yourself as an inspiration? I certainly do.
No, not at all. I just see myself as a parent who wanted to get involved and make a difference. And hopefully when I finish up in the sport, I can look back and see that I've made a difference to all kids participating and making sure that those barriers have been removed for everyone to be able to participate.
When do you plan to finish up? Not that we want you to finish up, Elisabeth, but there has to be other people there to replace you, because obviously you do a power of work.
Yeah, so my youngest son is 11 today, actually.
Right.
So
congratulations.
Little Ass
Happy birthday, Rubes.
Yeah.
Yes. Happy birthday.
Little Ass goes to under 17, so I'll be around for a little while yet, and then we'll see.
Wow. Well, they're lucky to have her, aren't they, Cindy?
They certainly are. And look, I think that's a big thing in a lot of our sports, is that a lot of the parents who are so passionate about change and growing the sport and doing things for the kids do tend to hang around. And look, we're probably going to be those ones that are going to be around after our children finish in some capacity. I don't think you ever, when you love something and you're passionate about something, I don't think you can ever fully walk away. And it's sometimes it can be easy to put a time frame on it. I don't know that it is always the case. I think if your heart's in it, it's something that will be there maybe forever. So do you think disability sport is growing? Do you think the media coverage of events like the World Para Championships and Paralympics going into mainstream TV is helping normalise disability in sport?
Absolutely. It's so great. Again, I keep going back to Little Ass, but even School Sport Victoria, I remember that year with Tori probably seeing 5 kids participating, and now there's so many more kids out there having a go at whatever level it may be, centre, region, state, national. It's incredible to see how the numbers have grown, and I think that is due to things like it being broadcast a lot more money going into advertising and promotion of the opportunities available to para-athletes to get involved at whatever level that may be, which is just fantastic. It's so good to see how much it's grown.
Do you think too, Elisabeth, with people like Dylan Alcott, Kurt Fernley, Ali Cole, having pretty strong profiles on television, and those 3 are all going to be part of Channel 9's Olympic coverage, and Paralympic coverage is also helping the sport when it comes to becoming more popular?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's I admit I follow them on Instagram and all those places too, because I love seeing I love seeing anyone achieve and following their stories, no matter who they are. And I think it's, they're really great. And that's definitely key to promoting the sport too.
Now, you're also a coach of athletes with a disability, as is your partner. So you're very sports involved. Do you think it's harder as a coach to see disability inclusion and to be able to include it, especially if you've got an able-bodied squad as well? Do you think that it's hard to include kids with a disability? And again, I'm assuming it would be the same protocols. It's talking to the parents and things like that. But as a coach, when you're wanting someone to succeed and you're trying to, I guess, give them the skills and the capacity to succeed, do you think it's harder to engage them? And what sort of tips or ideas would you have around that?
Yeah, so probably my partner Brett could speak more on this, obviously, because he actually coached Tori in the end. But I guess, for instance, with Tori, it can be tricky, I suppose, because you want them to be part of your squad, but what some athletes are working on they're working on the same thing. So it might be, for instance, their technique in a throw. However, the instructions given to Tori, obviously being short-statured, are very different to the able-bodied athletes, because she's got to consider her center of gravity and the way, whether she can do the spin and the way her body works different. As same as able-bodied athletes, obviously, because all their bodies are different. However, the instructions that Brett's giving, to them were very different. But at the end of the day, they're all working on the same thing, and it's the same as including it on a Saturday competition. It's just giving the same focus to all of them and making sure that they're all being included, and like you said, having those conversations. And I know that those were conversations that he had with Tori's mum around helping her with that. And it was quite funny, because at the time I remember saying, having a conversation around with another coach that had spoken to him about saying, well, how can she do the spin? She's short-statured. And he went, there is ways. Let's have that conversation. So it was actually a good conversation starter for other coaches to realise that coaching para-athletes is not scary if you have the right conversations and get to know their disability and what they can, what they're able to do, and how to progress. It comes quite naturally. So, yeah.
Now, you're a teacher by profession.
Yes.
And you're also in a regional area.
Yeah.
So this makes engagement even harder for athletes with a disability. Do you think inclusion in sport is growing in the school setting? And what do you think is done well or could be improved in the school environment to see inclusion not only grow but thrive? I know from our region that a lot of the schools don't have an understanding that there's multi-class pathways, and a lot of the teachers, and I've been engaging with some recently here, that had no clue how to go about classification, had no idea that their child could go through in a different pathway, so not through an able-bodied, and which is generally what they've always been offered, and just had to, I guess, fit in and hope that they were strong enough, able enough, as horrible as that is in a comment, to actually be able to go as far as they want to. Do you find that being a teacher, those opportunities are, I guess, harder, and also being regional even harder again?
Yeah, so I still think definitely the advertising around the opportunities for para-athletes has certainly improved since the days when Jack was in primary school. For context, he's now in year 10. So that has certainly, SSV have certainly worked hard in that space to promote those opportunities, which is great. But I do think filtering down to grassroots schools, sometimes it might take a passionate educator to ensure that information filters out to the parents and to help them understand what it even means for their child. Like in the instance of Tori, I said to Anthea, oh, Tori can go to nationals. And she went, what? You mean there's another level after this level? What does that even mean for Tori, sort of thing? And I still think there's a lot to be done in that space for people to know those opportunities are there. And regionally, it is tricky for us, I think, because the distance for some of those opportunities is great, and the cost involved, no matter the family, no matter the athlete, is sometimes astronomical, and out of reach for some. So I would like to personally see some more opportunities come to the regional areas to bridge that gap a little bit for all athletes in that aspect. Yeah,
I definitely think, Dan, that's a big issue. You know, I've seen para athletes have to travel 300 kilometres, 400 kilometres to be able to engage in a sport that is welcoming of them. And that's without taking it further to competition and state level and national level. So it is definitely something that able-bodied athletes also face when they live regionally. But when you're combining a disability, which in itself brings complex needs and complex additions to just getting somewhere and being able to actually engage in a sport, I think it's definitely something that School Sports Victoria are growing out of sight with their engagement. And I think they're doing such a phenomenal job with that. But I think from my own personal view, I think it really does struggle at grassroots. And I think there's a lot of kids out there that are missing opportunities because that understanding of what is available to them just isn't there. You do a lot of other sports. What other sports do well to help build engagement? So you're involved in netball and your children do other sports other than athletics. So you have a really great rounded view of what's available. What would you like to see in any of the sports that you're involved in to do to help grow the presence, both online and on the ground, of para sport?
So down my way, we've got a lot of we've got all abilities. Football is a big thing down here, which is amazing to watch. And we've also got the all abilities netball is starting to take off, which is fantastic as well. But it's funny, that question's quite relevant actually, because I had a netballer come up to me the other week and she said, oh, you know, you're really involved in para athletics and things like that. She said, I really want to get, you know, on the Victorian side, there's lots of these all abilities teams happening. She said, but how do I start one in New South Wales? How does that even happen? Where do I go to find that information? Who do I talk to? And so I think, again, it's still coming back to knowing where to find the resources, who to talk to, whether it's online or, you know, the local clubs trying to increase their presence so people can tap into them, to know what's out there and what's available at all ages. I'd like to see a bit more promotion locally or regionally of those things so the opportunities aren't missed.
So is your understanding, Elisabeth, that Victoria's miles in front of New South Wales when it comes to all ability sport and the development of all ability sport?
I wouldn't say that, no. Just locally, I've noticed it's more, there's a couple more teams on the Victorian side of the border. Right. But it's certainly happening in Albury. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not. And I'm certainly not going to split the states when I do most of my sport in one and I work in the other.
Yeah, fair enough. I know. I'm certainly not trying to throw you under the bus. Another question I wanted to ask you, and Elisabeth Ryan is our guest, leading administrator in all ability sport, based in Albury, for our podcast today, Inclusion Talks with Cindy McDougall and Dan Lonigan for Aussie Home Loans. The situation with these young people who are obviously participating in parasports, all ability sport. Now, you mentioned about the young girl with the short stature that she suffers from. There's a young boy who plays football for Coringal in the MPFNL in Frankston, and he's also short in stature. He plays in the reserves for Coringal, and they've embraced him magnificently at that club. Sadly, on social media, ladies, he has been treated really badly. They put little dwarfs on and they put their own faces on social media. Of course, they hide behind the fact that they're keyboard warriors. But it has been promoted by one of the companies I work for. We've done a couple of interviews. Channel 9 did an interview with young Blake. Do you think by having all ability sport that it protects these athletes that just want to participate and perform as well as they possibly can, if they were in with normal bodied athletes or able bodied athletes, that it protects them from social media and social media bullies?
No,
You
unfortunately.
don't think it does? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
No. I think social media, unfortunately, has a lot to answer for. As you said, there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there, and they find it easy to hide behind a screen. And some of them, unfortunately, will go seek out someone to go and bully and attack and belittle, no matter what you do. Unfortunately, on our social media, there's been times we've had to restrict comments so we don't get people going and writing disparaging things about our athletes. And, it's such a shame that that's the world we live in. And I hope that, with this, to go completely left of field with the talk around social media age groups being, increased, and hopefully a lot more education around social media and the effect on people's mental health, that we'll hopefully see a decline in that sort of behaviour. But yeah, unfortunately at the moment there's still a lot of work to be done in that space, I think.
And look, Dan, we know probably better than anybody that social media can be cruel, but you'd be very surprised at actual events where you see parents and you see people making disparaging comments. And, I've been in events where I've heard, and I'm sure Elisabeth has as well, where we would hear things that there is not a snowballs that anybody would ever think was acceptable. And you're hearing parents and people just throw it out there. Like, I've been on the sidelines where, they've made comments about people's ability, saying, oh, they shouldn't be here. They're making this event run late. What have they got people like that here for? And, yeah, it's not just social media. While social media is hard, I think that's why it is so important that we see people like Dylan Olcott and we see people with disabilities engaging in more mainstream media. And look, it's the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is because only through getting it out there and making it more normalized, I think, are we ever going to see situations like that decrease. And, I think it's disgusting when it's aimed at a child more than anything, because it's obviously coming from not a child's point of view. It's coming from somewhere else, and it's the child that is suffering because of that. But I really think that unless we can really get it out there and make it very normalized, I honestly can't see it changing in the near future. And it's sadly just something that I think is a way of life. And yeah, social media has definitely made it harder.
But it shouldn't be a way of life, though, should it? It should not be a way of life. I know you've said that, and we're probably a bit beaten in our views on it, but it shouldn't be a way of life. I mean, this young guy, and I can only use him as an example, that they love him at that football club, but they felt the need to come out and speak out about it on the company I work for, Gameface, who covers the MPFNL, and because they were so worried about him, he didn't really want to get too involved in it. But because we put it out, Channel 9 then jumped on board. He's got an issue with his spine, which hasn't developed properly. But, man, he's normal like everyone else. He just hasn't grown as much as everyone else. When I first saw him at the start of the year, I thought, gee, with the greatest respect, Karingal are struggling for numbers. And I knew they were struggling for numbers. He's young, playing reserves. Then I realised someone told me, oh, no, he's just short in stature. And at the end of the day, he plays good footy. He's a good player. So he should be treated like anyone else. Unfortunately, there's not an all-abilities footy club down there that can cater for him, and I'm sure he wouldn't want to play. He'd want to play normal footy. So let him play normal footy and leave him alone, for God's sake. It just annoys me, bullying.
Exactly. And I think that's where it's great seeing like the AFL, and it's great seeing Little Athletics Victoria and Little Athletics Australia and all of the major state sporting organisations and national sporting organisations doing that zero tolerance, because I think that's where where the difference is going to be made. I think it has to come from the higher ups, and it has to be that there are ramifications around, I term it mistreatment. The mistreatment of people with a disability, because, not all disabilities are visible, and you don't know the damage that can happen through, other people's, I guess, in some cases misguided, but in some cases deliberate ideals with regards to disability. And, Yeah, as I said, that's part of why we do what we do. And I think Elisabeth would agree with me that the more you can get it out there, especially around children, because if they see it as normal, they grow up with it as normal. It's not seen as something different. It's not seen as they understand it, and they understand better how to be better people when disability is included. So if you don't mind, I'll jump back onto the questions because I'm keen to get a bit more of an idea of Elisabeth's idea on things. Do you think that with the recent announcement of more funding into elite sport leading into the Brisbane Olympics, and we've seen a lot of it in social media, our Prime Minister's made quite a few targeted announcements in the last week. Do you think we'll finally see inclusion in sport start to become more normalised because it is coming from the higher levels of government? And that more up-and-coming athletes will be given an opportunity, especially in regional areas, to be able to do their best?
It's a tricky question. I hope so, is my answer.
So do I.
I don't have a crystal ball.
But you're not confident, are you?
Oh, look, I think we're heading in the right direction, that's for sure. Yeah.
Where do you see disability sport in 5 years' time?
Look, I hope that it's just normalised. It is just sport. And I hope that we see it broadcast everywhere at the same time, at the same events, not separate. I think it's going to grow and be bigger and bigger and just continue to be bigger, just, as we've seen over the past few years.
If you could give a message to a parent with an athlete with a disability who's looking at getting involved with their child in sport, knowing all that you know now and what you've learned, what would that message be?
Get involved. Some of them think that they can't. I know that an example last year was a family came along with their child to Little Laughs, and he participated and his sibling was in a wheelchair. And our president happened to be walking past and said, "What about your other young fella? Is he going to have a go?" And they went, "How? What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, he's able to have a go. We can do this, and this, and all these things for him to be able to participate if that's what you would like to happen." And they sort of went, "Oh, we didn't even think that a sport like athletics would be accessible to him." So I guess, my message is ask the question, how can my child be involved? Because you might be pleasantly surprised. There are lots of people out there willing to make it happen, and lots of clubs that are working in this space to make sure that all children and adults are able to participate.
Is he still involved? Is he still involved, the young guy?
So he didn't have a go this season. They just kept coming along with his brother, but we're hoping, because he just wanted to get a feel for the centre, as a lot of kids do, and we encourage them to keep coming and watching if that's where they're at. We're hoping this season that he comes and has a try. And that's, I guess, too, the best thing about Little Ash, you get the 2-week free trial, so they can come and have a go without any obligation to see how they feel and how they fit in.
Takes the pressure off.
It does. It really does.
On that one, if you could give a message to a child that is wanting to get involved in sport, what would your message to the child be?
Pretty much the same thing. Have a go. You'd be surprised at some of the friends that you make out of it. Like, I know that some of Jack's best friends that he has met along the way in the sport are his para friends. And we've got beautiful photos of him competing with his mates. And, like, Jack's won medals and ribbons in his own right, but if you asked him his memories of the sport, it's not going to be about those things. It's going to be his mate Charlie or Jackson or any of those people that he's competed with in his age group along the way, because he's had such beautiful friendships and fun with them.
I have to give a shout out to that, Dan. So Elisabeth's son Jack has, really grown and is doing so well in his sport, and he is able-bodied, but he, I guess, has given Elisabeth a lot of time and cost and pressures in her career as that outside of sport parent but her son Jack is actually blazing a trail at state and national level now as well. So it's something that, you know, there's been a lot of barriers for him being regional, and there's been a lot of barriers for Elisabeth because, you know, I think at one stage this year she was back and forward to Adelaide 2 or 3 times in 3 weeks from Albury. So you know, it's definitely something that I think we've talked a lot about this, but I think the barriers of being regional and funding streams, not just for people with a disability and athletes with a disability, I think there, especially leading into our Olympics coming up, you know, I think there needs to be an increase in the funding to see the best of our athletes grow, because a child like Jack, who has come along in leaps and bounds, and, you know, I don't think Elisabeth will mind me saying this, but many years ago, he was told that he would never succeed and never medal at states. And you know, from a parent who really should have known better. And it you know, goes back to that bullying. But he then proved them very wrong. And this year went to nationals and absolutely smashed it. Again, he had to travel backwards and forwards to Adelaide quite a few times in a couple of weeks. Funding is, I think, a really big key in sport. And I think especially with people with a disability, you know, we've said about centres being able to access equipment, and we've said about kids being able to access what they need to be able to be involved. You can have the best administrators on the planet, and you can have the most engaged parents and the most engaged officials. But I think funding is something definitely in regional areas needs to improve to see things grow. Have you found that a barrier for you as an able-bodied parent to being able to give Jack the best opportunities that he can?
Funding? Yeah. So I'll give you you touched on it. Adelaide was a good example. So I am a teacher, and for those that love to say we get all the holidays in the world, what you probably don't know is during the school term, if we have to take leave, if you have not accumulated long service leave, which, you know, takes many years to do, you take unpaid leave. So for me to take Jack to Adelaide to nationals, of which we had to go for a week for travel either side of his events, I had to take unpaid leave. So therefore it meant for our family, we then travelled home. We spent 4 days at home so I could go back to work for 4 days. So I didn't go a whole 3 weeks without any money. And then we travelled back to Adelaide again for his second lot of nationals. You know, we did apply for the Australian Sporting Champions grant, but I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. Whilst it's a fantastic grant, if you manage to get it, I'm pretty sure it said on the application 5,000 to 7,000 applicants miss out on that grant a year. Wow. And that's huge. That's a huge amount of people that miss out. You know, and like our council's great. We got told about a grant by someone that you could access, that they give out to sporting people that you can apply for. So we were lucky enough to get one of those for $400 from the council. But then obviously you can't apply for a while, and other people need to have a go at that too. So certainly I think regionally, you know, funding is definitely a thing that we sort of need to improve on, because, you know, for Jack, next steps for Jack, he really, really would love to do pole vault. But to do pole vault for us would require either a trip to Melbourne, which is 8 hours on a Sunday, or Bendigo, which is, you know, 6 hours, not so it's much of a muchness, and it would be every week. And as a family with the cost of living and everything like that, it's becoming a bit of a choice as to whether you participate in sport due to the funding being regional, because whilst we have fantastic coaches down here, and we do have access to coaches in many disciplines, some of the kids get to a level where, you know, unfortunately we do have to look outside of Albury-Wodonga for that to progress in their sport. So, yeah, I certainly think funding is an issue. I don't have the answer for how to fix it, but I know I'm certainly not the only regional family that's faced these sorts of choices. And, you know, and sometimes it comes down to, you know, Jack's younger brother stays home. We can't afford to take him, so I have to take just Jack to compete and so on, because, you know, the travel and the cost involved from being on the border.
How can I just ask you this? How far do you think Jack can go with his sport? And you touched on it briefly then, Elisabeth. Would you consider moving to Melbourne or to Sydney? I mean, Sydney, the cost of living up there is out of control. But would you consider moving to Melbourne to give him the best opportunity if you had to?
We've actually had that discussion a few times. we quite often joke with the amount of driving we do to Melbourne. I swear there was 6 weeks and six weekends in a row in the lead up to nationals between little athletics and senior athletics. We were in Melbourne driving backwards and forwards. So we joked about buying a house down there. But I guess it, in a family that has more than one sibling, one child, you've got to consider the whole picture and what that looks like for his brother as well. So I don't know, to be honest, if we would move. I suppose it also depends on Jack, how far he wants to go, whether he really wants to pursue and put in the hard yards to try and, get into a national team or whatever it may be, or try and make the Australian team. That would require, and that probably would require that discussion as to whether we would have to move. That just, I don't think is realistic to happen from here. But then again, I do know of some athletes down here on the border that have made the Australian team in the under 21s and whatnot, but they do travel to Melbourne every week for coaching. So,
and look, I can probably speak for that one that, I had an athlete with a disability and we did 75,000 kilometres a year for 3 years, just getting them down there. So we would train a 280k round trip 3 times a week, then a 280k round trip once on the weekend, and then a 440 kilometre round trip on alternating Sundays for 3 years. And, I had children with a disability and that added an extra layer to that. And that's part of the reason why we stepped away from seniors this year. And, it's a 280 kilometre round trip and you have a child with a disability, you take them there and they don't want to compete by the time they get there. So, mine are intellectually disabled and have ASD and just a car trip alone can shut them off and we can drive all that way and get to the track and they refuse to get out of the car and there goes the day. So, I think that's where there really is that need, which is a thing we may as well go into, is, getting coaches trained up for athletes with a disability and getting the officials trained up for athletes with a disability. So, and it's not just athletics, it's all sports, so that you can actually give children an opportunity where they don't have to do those sort of distances and they can get the best opportunity to grow. Able-bodied or athletes with a disability, I think, is really important. And look, there's been some great growth in that in the last couple of weeks. I've noticed some of the regional sports academies have got some funding streams opening up mainly for people with a disability to do accessible programs. But I think that's something that in the future will need to be looked at if we're truly going to grow our capabilities for athletes with a disability. Then it is about getting it out into the regional areas and having the opportunities in the regional areas, because it is such a barrier that most of the opportunities for kids, and especially ones with a disability, where you're looking at having to take a throwing chair, you're having to take a wheelchair, you're having to take adaptive equipment, you're having children who don't cope with car trips and you have to drive 8 hours, you're going to lose a lot of incredibly talented athletes for the tyranny of distance.
Yeah,
so Elisabeth, I guess we've covered a lot today, and I'm so grateful that you've been, able to get in on the podcast. I love what you're doing in the sport, and I love how you are able to inspire others to build up opportunity. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? I'm going to throw a little strange question at you.
Well, Jack's 15, so he'll be gone.
Yep.
Probably
parents
not.
Parents like us are counting down those days.
Oh, look, I don't know. Probably still working in some sporting administrative role. I don't think I can step away. Whether I might take a step back and try and start saying no and not taking on quite as much. But, I do love it, and I love making a difference in whatever sport I'm involved in. So, yeah, probably still going to be floating around.
Do you need more volunteers, Elisabeth? And is there a feeling with people who may want to get involved but are not 100% sure, I won't get involved this time round because we've got a great person like Elisabeth that'll keep doing it? And then at the end of the day, when you decide it is time, and it will be time one day, whether it be short-term, medium-term, long-term, that those people are then not there, and then you're running out of volunteers. So you've got to constantly keep training people and keep encouraging people, don't you? That's the big issue, especially in community sport and regional sport.
Absolutely. Volunteers in all areas, all sporting groups I'm involved in are lacking. And I think it's for a multitude of reasons. Time poor, work, don't want to. COVID, people kind of realised it was good to get their free time back during COVID. But you're right, we do need to start making sure we're having those succession plans and bringing people through and educating them so we can step away and know that we're leaving the sport in capable hands, because, we won't be around forever. Particularly, I see especially at a region level at athletics, parents are reluctant to take that extra step and get involved at a regional level. And we've got fantastic administrators that have been around for donkey's years since their kids did it, and now they're all grandparents and whatnot, wanting to step away, but those people haven't come through and been trained up, and so they're still going. So there is work to be done in that space. And I suppose at Albury we are lucky. We do get a lot of people come through. This year we've got a new registrar after our registrar of probably 5 years has stepped back onto general committee. So we're training someone new up. We've got a new treasurer. So we're starting to cycle through, but it is really hard, I find, to get the parents of the younger kids wanting to commit, because they're sort of in the athletic space. They're reluctant, I think, because they go, is my kid only going to like this sport for a year and then I'm not here next year? So I just don't quite want to commit just yet. They want to they always say to us, oh, give us this year, we'll see how we go. And then if I'm here next year, I'll probably jump in. But I guess we just, from a community point of view, as long as they're volunteering out in the field, raking a pit, packing up equipment, measuring, whatever it might be, they're still helping. So we still welcome that help, whether they're on committee or not.
Well, Elisabeth, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for giving us so much time. I'll say it again, you're an inspiration to all ability sport for the work you do. You continue to do a power of work and may continue for many years to come. And we thank you for joining myself and Cindy. And thanks, Cindy, again for organising such a great guest on Inclusion Talks for Aussie Home Loans. We've got 25 lenders around Australia, and they're available to talk to you face-to-face on the phone, or like we are with our podcasts, via Zoom. Thanks so much for joining us, and good luck going forward.
Thank you.